She was dead before the tide came in. I found her at the base of the lighthouse, her body broken on the rocks, her white dress billowing in the November wind like a ghost trying to escape. The waves crashed around her, hungry and patient, waiting to claim what the fall had not yet taken. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. She was 73 years old. She had been the lighthouse keeper of Widow's Point for 47 years. And according to everyone in the town of Harborview, Massachusetts, she had no enemies.
No secrets.
No reason to die. But I knew better. Because clutched in her cold, stiff hand was a letter. A letter addressed to me. A letter that began with 6 words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I know who killed your mother. My name is Sarah Winslow. I am 51 years old. I was a detective with the Boston Police Department for 23 years before I retired last spring. I thought I was done with death. Done with mysteries. Done with the weight of other people's secrets pressing down on my shoulders. I was wrong. Have you ever received a message that changed everything? Have you ever had a moment when the world split in two, the before and the after, and you knew that nothing would ever be the same? Have you ever stood on the edge of a truth so terrible that part of you wanted to run, to pretend you never saw it, to go back to the comfortable lie you had been living? That is where I stood on November 15th, 2023. On the rocks beneath Widow's Point Lighthouse. Holding a letter from a dead woman. About to unravel a mystery that had been buried for 30 years. This is the story of what I discovered. It is a story about love and betrayal. About the lies we tell to protect the people we love. About the price of silence and the power of truth. And by the end, you will understand why some secrets are worth dying for. And why some are worth killing for. If you love mysteries that keep you guessing until the final moment, subscribe to this channel now. New stories arrive every week, and I promise you, this one will stay with you long after it ends. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. 3 days earlier. The day Eleanor Marsh's letter arrived at my apartment in Boston. The envelope was plain white. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in elegant cursive that spoke of another era. Sarah Winslow. 47, Marlborough Street. Boston, Massachusetts. I almost threw it away. I received a lot of mail in those days. Letters from old colleagues. Invitations to retirement parties. Requests from true crime podcasters who wanted to interview me about the cases I had solved. I had stopped opening most of them. I was tired. Tired of death. Tired of darkness. Tired of being the person everyone expected to have answers. But something about this envelope made me pause. Maybe it was the handwriting. Old-fashioned. Deliberate. The handwriting of someone who had learned to write with a fountain pen and had never seen the point of changing. Maybe it was the postmark. Harborview, Ma. A town I had not thought about in 3 decades. A town I had tried very hard to forget. Or maybe it was instinct. That whisper in the back of my mind that had saved my life more times than I could count. The voice that said, "Pay attention. This matters." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in the same elegant handwriting. Dear Miss Winslow. You do not know me, but I know you. I have known about you for 30 years, ever since the night your mother died. I have watched from a distance as you grew up, as you became a police officer, as you built a career out of seeking justice for the dead. And I have wondered, all this time, whether I should tell you what I know. I have decided that I must. Your mother did not die in an accident, Sarah. She was murdered. And I know who did it. Come to Widow's Point Lighthouse. Come alone. Come before it is too late. There are things you must know. Secrets that have been kept for far too long. And I am the only one left who can tell you the truth. Please hurry. I do not have much time. Yours in hope. Eleanor Marsh. I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat down heavily on my couch and tried to remember how to breathe. My mother. Catherine Winslow. She had died when I was 21 years old. A car accident on a rainy November night. Her vehicle had gone off the road and into the harbor. By the time they found her, she had been underwater for 6 hours. The police ruled it an accident. Un tragique accident. A slick road, a sharp curve, a moment of inattention. These things happened. I had accepted that explanation for 30 years. Now a stranger was telling me it was a lie. I should have called the police. I should have contacted the Harborview Sheriff's Department and let them investigate. That was the proper procedure. The safe procedure. The procedure I would have recommended to anyone else in my situation. Instead, I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove north. Because I had to know. Because the weight I had been carrying for 30 years, the weight of my mother's death, the weight of all the questions I had never been able to answer, suddenly felt unbearable. And because Eleanor Marsh was right about one thing. It was almost too late. The drive to Harborview took 4 hours. I watched the landscape change as I headed up the coast. The suburbs of Boston giving way to small towns, then to farmland, then to the rugged, windswept coast of northern Massachusetts. The trees were bare, their branches reaching toward a gray sky like fingers grasping at something just out of reach. The ocean appeared and disappeared between the hills, dark and restless, flecked with whitecaps. I had not been back to Harborview since my mother's funeral. The town had been too painful, too full of memories, too haunted by the ghost of the woman I had loved more than anyone in the world. But now, as I drove down Main Street, I realized that the town had changed. New shops had opened. Old buildings had been renovated. The fishing boats in the harbor were sleeker, more modern, their crews younger and more diverse than the weathered old salts I remembered from my childhood. And yet, something remained the same. The lighthouse. I could see it from the center of town, standing alone on its rocky point, its white tower rising against the gray sky. Widow's Point Lighthouse. Built in 1847. Abandoned by the Coast Guard in 1976. Maintained ever since by a single woman. Eleanor Marsh. I found a room at the Harbor Inn, a small bed and breakfast overlooking the water. The owner was a woman named Ruth Cavanaugh, 60-something, with sharp eyes and a warm smile. "You are here about Eleanor," she said as she handed me my key. It was not a question. "How did you know?" "Small town. Word travels." She tilted her head, studying me. "You look familiar. Have you been here before?" "A long time ago." I hesitated. "My mother lived here." "Catherine Winslow." Ruth's expression changed. Something flickered across her face, quickly hidden. Recognition. And something else. Something that looked almost like fear. "Catherine's daughter." She nodded slowly. "Yes. I remember now. You were just a girl when she died." "I was 21. "A girl," Ruth repeated. She turned away, busying herself with papers on the desk. "The lighthouse is closed to visitors. Has been since Eleanor passed. She died 3 days ago." "That is right." Ruth did not look at me. "Fell from the observation deck, they say." "Terrible accident." "Was it?" Ruth's hand stilled. She turned to face me. "What are you suggesting, Miss Winslow?" "I am not suggesting anything. I am asking a question." We stared at each other. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, a gull cried. Finally, Ruth spoke. Eleanor was a private woman. She kept to herself. She kept secrets. She paused. And some of those secrets, Miss Winslow, are better left buried. Not if they involve my mother. Ruth's face went pale. "I do not know what Eleanor told you," she said. "But whatever it was, I suggest you forget it. Go back to Boston. Live your life. Let the dead rest." She turned and walked away, disappearing through a door behind the desk. I stood in the empty lobby, holding my room key, and wondered what I had just walked into. The next morning, I went to the lighthouse. The path wound along the cliff top, a narrow trail of packed earth and weathered stone. The wind was brutal, cutting through my jacket, whipping my hair into my face. The ocean roared below, waves smashing against the rocks with a violence that seemed almost personal. I thought about Eleanor Marsh, walking this path every day for 47 years. Climbing those stairs. tending that light, watching the horizon for ships that no longer came. And I wondered what she had seen from that tower. What secrets she had witnessed. What truths she had kept locked away for 3 decades. The lighthouse itself was beautiful in a stark, lonely way. White clapboard walls, weathered by decades of salt and wind. A black iron door that groaned when I pushed it open. A spiral staircase winding up into darkness. I climbed. The stairs were narrow and steep. My footsteps echoed in the hollow tower. Light filtered down from somewhere above, pale and grey, illuminating the dust motes that swirled in my wake. At the top, I emerged into the lantern room. The view was breathtaking. 360 degrees of ocean and sky. The town of Harbourview huddled in the distance, its houses tiny and fragile against the vastness of the sea. The rocky coastline stretched north and south, dotted with coves and inlets that had once sheltered smugglers and pirates. And below, the rocks where Eleanor had died. I looked down. The tide was out. The rocks were exposed, black and jagged, slick with seaweed. I could see the exact spot where her body had been found. A small depression between 2 larger boulders, just wide enough to cradle a human form. Had she jumped? Had she fallen? Had she been pushed? I did not know. Not yet. But I was going to find out. Behind me, a floorboard creaked. I spun around. A man stood at the top of the stairs. He was perhaps 60, tall and lean, with silver hair and eyes the color of the winter sea. He wore a fisherman's sweater and heavy boots, and he looked at me with an expression I could not read. "You should not be here," he said. The door was open. That does not make it an invitation. He stepped into the lantern room, and I noticed that despite his age, he moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in their body. Someone dangerous. "Who are you?" "Sarah Winslow. I am here about Eleanor Marsh." Something flickered in his eyes. "You are the detective." "I was a detective. I'm retired now. And yet you came running the moment Eleanor sent her letter." He tilted his head. "What did she tell you?" "That my mother was murdered." The man was silent for a long moment. The wind howled around the lighthouse, rattling the windows. Below, the waves crashed against the rocks. "Your mother," he said finally. "Catherine Winslow." "Yes. I remember her." "You knew her." "Everyone knew her. She was," he paused, searching for the right word, "remarkable. Beautiful. Kind. And completely unaware of the danger she was in." "What danger?" The man walked to the window and looked out at the sea. "Harbourview has secrets, Miss Winslow. Old secrets. Secrets that people have killed to protect." He turned to face me. "Your mother discovered one of those secrets 30 years ago. And someone made sure she could never tell anyone what she found." "Who? Who killed her?" "I do not know. That is the truth." He held up a hand, forestalling my protest. "But Eleanor knew. She saw something that night. Something she kept hidden for 3 decades. And now she is dead too." "You think she was murdered?" "I think she was pushed off this lighthouse by someone who did not want her secret to come out." He paused. "And I think that same someone knows you are here. Knows why you came. And will do whatever it takes to stop you from learning the truth." "Who are you?" "My name is Thomas Gray. I was your mother's friend. And I have been waiting 30 years for someone to finally ask the right questions. If you are finding yourself pulled into this mystery, take a moment to like this video. Your engagement helps other mystery lovers find these stories, and it means more than you know. Now, let me tell you what Thomas told me. We sat in Eleanor's cottage, a small building beside the lighthouse that smelled of salt and old books. Thomas made tea while I looked around, searching for clues, searching for anything that might explain why a 73-year-old woman had died with a letter in her hand. The cottage was neat and sparse. A narrow bed covered with a patchwork quilt. A small kitchen with a cast-iron stove. Shelves lined with books, mostly novels, mostly old. And photographs. Dozens of photographs, covering every available surface. I picked up one of the frames. A young woman smiled back at me. Dark hair. Dark eyes. A face I recognized. My mother. She was beautiful, Thomas said from behind me. Inside and out. Everyone who met her loved her. He set 2 cups of tea on the small table. That was her gift. And her curse. Why her curse? Because she loved Harborview. She believed in this town, in its people. She could not imagine that anyone here would be capable of true evil. He sat down heavily in a worn armchair. But she was wrong. Tell me. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to speak. 30 years ago, Harborview was dying. The fishing industry had collapsed. The young people were leaving. The town was rotting from the inside out. And then a man came. A businessman from Boston. He promised to save us. Who was he? His name was Richard Pemberton. He bought up half the town. The old cannery, the pier, most of the waterfront property. He said he was going to turn Harborview into a tourist destination. A quaint New England getaway for wealthy city people looking for authentic coastal charm. And people believed him. They wanted to believe him. Thomas sighed. When you are drowning, you do not ask questions about the hand that reaches down to save you. You just grab on and pray. What happened? For a while, it worked. Money flowed into the town. Buildings were renovated. New businesses opened. People started to hope again. He paused. But your mother, she started asking questions. She worked at the town hall, in the records office. She had access to documents that no one else could see. And she found something. What? I do not know exactly. She never told me. But whatever it was, it frightened her. She came to me 2 days before she died and said she had discovered something terrible. Something that could destroy Harborview. She said she needed proof before she could go to the authorities. And then she died. And then she died. Thomas met my eyes. 2 days later. In a car accident that was not an accident. You are saying Richard Pemberton killed her. I am saying that Richard Pemberton had motive. He had opportunity. And he had the power to make it look like an accident. Thomas leaned forward. But I could never prove it. And neither could Eleanor. Eleanor saw something. Eleanor saw everything from that lighthouse. She was watching the night your mother died. She saw a car follow your mother out of town. She saw it force her off the road. And she saw who was driving. Then why did she not go to the police? Because she was afraid. Because Pemberton was powerful. Because the sheriff at the time was in his pocket. Thomas shook his head. And because she knew that if she spoke up, she would be next. So she stayed silent for 30 years. She stayed silent to survive. But the guilt ate at her. Every day. Every year. Watching you from a distance, knowing the truth, unable to tell you. He paused. And then Pemberton died last month. Heart attack. And Eleanor decided that it was finally safe to speak. But someone else did not want her to. Someone else. Thomas nodded grimly. Someone who knew what Pemberton had done. Someone who helped him cover it up. Someone who is still alive. Still here. Still willing to kill to protect the secret. Who? That is what we need to find out. I set down my tea. Looked around the cottage. Thought about Eleanor Marsh, alone in this lighthouse for 47 years, carrying a secret that must have weighed more than the tower itself. Where is the letter? I asked. The one she was holding when she died. Thomas's expression shifted. Confusion. Then concern. What letter? The letter addressed to me. She was clutching it when I found her body. You found her body. I arrived yesterday morning. I came straight to the lighthouse. She was at the base of the rocks. I showed him my hands, still scraped from climbing down to reach her. I called the police. I gave a statement. But I kept the letter. Thomas stared at me. What did it say? That she knew who killed my mother. Thomas went pale. She wrote it down. The name. No. Just that she knew. I pulled the letter from my pocket and handed it to him. She said there were things I needed to know. Secrets that had been kept too long. She asked me to come before it was too late. Thomas read the letter. His hands trembled slightly. This is not Eleanor's handwriting, he said. What? This letter. It was not written by Eleanor. He looked up at me, and I saw fear in his eyes. Someone lured you here, Sarah. Someone wanted you in Harborview. And whoever that someone is, they are not your friend. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had been manipulated. Someone had forged Eleanor's letter, used her death as bait, drawn me to this town for reasons I did not yet understand. But why? What did they want from me? We need to find Eleanor's real papers, I said. Her journals, her notes, anything she might have written down about what she saw that night. I have looked. Thomas gestured helplessly at the cottage. The police searched after she died. They found nothing. Because someone got here first. Possibly. Or because Eleanor was too careful to write anything down. She survived this long by keeping her secrets in her head, not on paper. Then how did she expect to tell me the truth? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she was dying. What? Cancer. Eleanor was diagnosed 6 months ago. She had weeks left, maybe less. He rubbed his face with both hands. She knew her time was running out. She must have decided to finally speak, to tell you face to face what she had witnessed. But someone found out. Someone stopped her before she could. Who knew she was dying? Her doctor. The nurses at the clinic. A few close friends. He hesitated. And me. I knew. I studied him carefully. His face was open, honest. But I had been a detective long enough to know that faces could lie. Where were you when Eleanor died? Thomas met my gaze without flinching. At home. Alone. I have no alibi, Miss Winslow. I am aware of how that looks. But I did not kill Eleanor. She was my friend. And I want the same thing you want. The truth. I believed him. Against my better judgment, I believed him. But I had been wrong before. Then help me find it, I said. Help me find the truth. Before whoever killed Eleanor decides I am next. The rest of that day was a blur of questions and dead ends. We spoke to Ruth Kavanagh at the Harbour Inn. She denied knowing anything about Eleanor's death, denied knowing anything about my mother's murder, denied knowing anything at all. But her eyes told a different story. Ruth was afraid. Deeply afraid. And she was not going to talk. We spoke to the sheriff, a young man named Daniel Hayes who had not even been born when my mother died. He was polite, professional, and completely unhelpful. Eleanor's death was ruled an accident, he said. No evidence of foul play. Case closed. We spoke to the doctor who had treated Eleanor, a tired woman named Dr. Chen who confirmed the cancer diagnosis but could tell us nothing else. Patient confidentiality, she said. Even in death. By evening, I was exhausted and frustrated. We had learned nothing. We were no closer to the truth than when I arrived. But then Thomas said something that changed everything. There is one person we have not talked to. He spoke reluctantly, as if the words were being pulled from him against his will. Someone who knew Eleanor better than anyone. Someone who might know what she saw that night. Who? Her daughter. I stared at him. Eleanor had a daughter. She never spoke of her. They were estranged. Had been for decades. Thomas paused. But if anyone knows Eleanor's secrets, it would be Margaret. Margaret. Margaret Marsh. She lives in town. Has for years. But she and Eleanor did not speak. Not since, he hesitated, not since your mother died. Why? What happened between them? That, Thomas said quietly, is what we need to find out. I found Margaret Marsh in the town cemetery. She was standing before a grave, her hands clasped in front of her, her head bowed. She was perhaps my age, early 50s, with grey-streaked hair and a face that might have been beautiful once, before grief carved its lines deep. The grave she was standing before was my mother's. I stopped a few feet away, uncertain what to say. She would have been glad you came, Margaret said without turning around. She always wondered about you. Watched from a distance. Wanted to reach out but never knew how. Eleanor. Margaret nodded. She loved you, you know. From afar. She felt responsible. Responsible for what? For your mother's death. Margaret finally turned to face me. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. She blamed herself. Blamed herself for staying silent. For letting fear keep her from doing the right thing. She could have gone to the police. And said what? That she saw a car following another car on a dark road? That she watched from a quarter-mile away as someone drove your mother off the cliff? Margaret shook her head. She had no proof. No evidence. Just her word against the most powerful man in town. Richard Pemberton. Margaret's expression flickered. So you know about him. I know he is dead. I know he was here when my mother died. I know he had reasons to want her silenced. I stepped closer. What I do not know is why. What did my mother discover that was worth killing for? Margaret was silent for a long time. The wind blew through the cemetery, rustling the dead leaves, carrying the scent of the sea. Pemberton was a fraud, she said finally. All his money, all his investments, all his promises to save this town, it was built on lies. He was laundering money through Harborview. Drug money. Criminal money. Using the town as a front for something much darker. And my mother found out. She found the records. The real records, hidden in the basement of the town hall. Shell companies, fake invoices, money moving in and out of accounts that did not exist. She paused. Your mother was going to expose him. She was going to bring down everything he had built. So he killed her. Margaret nodded slowly. But that is not the whole story, is it? I said. Pemberton did not act alone. Someone helped him. Someone drove the car that forced my mother off the road. Someone pushed Eleanor off the Lighthouse 3 days ago. And Pemberton has been dead for a month. Margaret's face went pale. Who? I pressed. Who was his accomplice? Who is still killing to protect this secret? I cannot tell you. Cannot or will not. Both. Margaret's voice cracked. Because if I tell you, they will kill me too. Who? Tell me, please. Margaret stared at me. Her eyes were filled with terror. With grief. With 30 years of silence that had crushed her from within. And then she spoke a name. A name I recognized. A name that changed everything. Ruth Kavanaugh, she whispered. Ruth was driving the car that night. Ruth killed your mother. If this mystery is keeping you on the edge of your seat, share it with someone who loves a good story. Leave a comment telling me who you think is really behind these murders. And stay with me until the end, because the truth is closer than you think. And it is darker than anyone imagined. I drove back to the Harbour Inn in a daze. Ruth Kavanaugh. The woman who had given me a room. Who had smiled at me and handed me a key. Who had warned me to leave, to let the dead rest, to stop asking questions. She had killed my mother. She had stood behind that desk, knowing who I was, knowing why I was here, knowing that she was the one responsible for the accident that was not an accident. And she had said nothing. I parked outside the inn and sat in my car, watching the lights in the windows, thinking about what to do next. I should call the police. I should find Sheriff Hayes and tell him what Margaret had told me. I should let justice take its course. But I did not move. Because I needed to understand. I needed to look Ruth in the eye and ask her why. Why had she done it? Why had she stayed silent for 30 years? And why, if she was the killer, had she not silenced me already? I got out of the car. The inn was quiet. The lobby was empty. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, casting long shadows across the walls. Ruth, I called. No answer. I walked behind the desk. The door to the back office was open. I pushed through. And found Ruth Kavanaugh on the floor. She was lying in a pool of blood, her eyes staring at nothing, her mouth open in a silent scream. A knife protruded from her chest, driven deep, angled upward toward the heart. She was dead. I knelt beside her, my training taking over. Checked for a pulse. Found none. Noted the position of the body, the angle of the wound, the spatter pattern on the floor. And saw the paper clutched in her hand. Another letter. Addressed to me. I pried it from her stiff fingers and read. Dear Sarah. You are getting closer. But you are not there yet. Ruth was a pawn. A tool. She did not know the full truth. She only knew what she was told. The real killer is still out there. Still watching. Still waiting. If you want to know who murdered your mother, come to the Lighthouse at midnight. Come alone. And bring the courage to face what you find. I read the letter twice. Then I looked at Ruth's body. At the blood spreading across the floor. At the face of the woman who had killed my mother and was now dead herself. Someone was playing a game. Someone was eliminating everyone who knew the truth. And they were using me as bait, drawing me deeper into a web I did not understand. I should have called the police. I should have waited for backup. But I had been waiting for 30 years. And I was done being patient. I left the Harbour Inn and drove toward the Lighthouse. Toward the truth. Toward the final confrontation I had been waiting for my entire life. The lighthouse stood against the night sky like a finger pointing at the stars. I parked at the base of the path and sat in the darkness, watching. Waiting. Thinking about what I was walking into. Someone had killed 3 people to keep this secret. My mother. Eleanor. Ruth. 3 women, silenced over 3 decades. And now whoever was responsible wanted me at that lighthouse. Wanted me alone. Wanted me vulnerable. It was almost certainly a trap. I went anyway. The path was treacherous in the dark. The wind had picked up, carrying salt spray from the waves below. I could hear the ocean crashing against the rocks, hungry and patient, waiting for another body to claim. The lighthouse door was open. I climbed the stairs. At the top, in the lantern room, a figure stood silhouetted against the glass. A man. Tall. Familiar. Thomas Gray. I stopped on the top step. You, I said. Thomas turned to face me. In the pale moonlight, his expression was unreadable. I was wondering how long it would take you to figure it out. I have not figured out anything. I stepped into the lantern room, keeping my distance, keeping my eyes on his hands. I just came to ask questions. Then ask. Did you kill them? My mother. Eleanor. Ruth. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. The wind howled around the lighthouse. The waves crashed below. Then he said, I killed no one. Then who did? Thomas smiled. It was a sad smile. A tired smile. That, he said, is what I have been trying to tell you all along. But you were not ready to hear it. He paused. Are you ready now? Tell me. Thomas walked to the window and looked out at the sea. Richard Pemberton was a monster, he said. He destroyed this town. He corrupted everyone he touched. He killed your mother and let Ruth take the blame. He paid her to drive that car, and he paid her to stay silent for 30 years. And Eleanor. Eleanor knew everything. She saw what happened. And when Pemberton died, she decided to finally tell the truth. He paused. But there was someone else. Someone Pemberton trusted more than anyone. Someone who helped him cover up his crimes. Someone who is still alive. Who? Thomas turned to face me. Your father. The words hit me like a physical blow. My father. I stumbled backward, my hand finding the cold iron railing, gripping it to keep myself upright. The lighthouse seemed to spin around me. The ocean roared below. And Thomas Gray stood watching, his face a mask of sorrow and something that might have been pity. You are lying, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Distant. Hollow. My father was not. He could not have been. He was. Thomas spoke gently, the way you speak to someone who is breaking. I am sorry, Sarah. I am so sorry. I did not want to tell you this way. I did not want to tell you at all. But you came here looking for the truth. And the truth is what you deserve. My father loved my mother. He loved her more than anything. Yes, he did. And that love destroyed him. I shook my head. The world was fragmenting around me. Everything I had believed, everything I had built my life upon, was crumbling into dust. Tell me, I said. Tell me everything. Thomas walked to the bench that circled the lantern room and sat down heavily. He suddenly looked old. Tired. A man who had been carrying a burden for far too long. Your father, James Winslow, was Richard Pemberton's lawyer. Did you know that? I did not answer. I had not known. My father had died when I was 30, a heart attack, sudden and unexpected. He had never spoken about his work in Harborview. He had never spoken about anything from before we moved to Boston. Now I understood why. Pemberton hired your father in 1990, Thomas continued, when the money laundering operation was at its peak. Your father was young, ambitious. He wanted to build a career, provide for his family. He did not ask too many questions about where the money came from. He was complicit. He was blind. Thomas shook his head. Or he chose to be blind. It amounts to the same thing in the end. But then something changed. What? Your mother. Thomas met my eyes. Catherine started asking questions. She found the documents in the town hall basement. She started connecting the dots. And she told your father what she had discovered. He must have been horrified. He was terrified. Because he realized that he was part of it. That his name was on those documents. That if your mother went to the authorities, he would go to prison. He paused. And he was afraid of something else too. He was afraid of what Pemberton would do to protect himself. So he warned Pemberton. He told Pemberton that Catherine knew. That she was planning to go to the FBI. That she had to be stopped. Thomas's voice dropped. He did not know what Pemberton would do. He did not imagine. I do not think he could have imagined. But he told him. And 2 days later, your mother was dead. My father got my mother killed. The words tasted like poison in my mouth. My father. The man who had raised me. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had read me bedtime stories, who had held me when I cried at my mother's funeral. The man I had loved and trusted and mourned. He had betrayed us all. Thomas stood and walked to where I was standing. He did not touch me. He just stood there, close enough to catch me if I fell. Your father did not know Pemberton would kill her, he said quietly. He thought Pemberton would pay her off. Scare her. Make her leave town. He never imagined murder. Does that matter? Thomas was silent for a long moment. I do not know, he said finally. I have been asking myself that question for 30 years. Does intention matter when the outcome is the same? Does ignorance excuse complicity? Is a man who lights a match responsible for the fire, even if he did not mean for the house to burn? I do not have an answer. Neither do I, Thomas sighed. But I know this. Your father spent the rest of his life trying to atone for what he did. He left Harborview. He changed careers. He dedicated himself to pro bono work, helping people who could not afford lawyers. He never stopped trying to balance the scales. And he never told me the truth. He was ashamed. Thomas's voice cracked. He loved you, Sarah. More than you will ever know. And he could not bear the thought of you looking at him the way you are looking at me right now. I turned away. Stared out at the dark ocean. The waves crashed against the rocks below, the same rocks where Eleanor had died, the same rocks where my mother's car had plunged into the water 30 years ago. If my father is dead, I said slowly, and Pemberton is dead, and Ruth is dead, and Eleanor is dead, then who killed them? Who is still out there? Who wrote those letters? Thomas was quiet for a moment. That is what I have been trying to figure out, he said. And I think I finally know. Who? There was one other person who knew everything. One other person who helped Pemberton cover his tracks. One other person who has been hiding in plain sight this whole time. Thomas. The voice came from behind us. We both spun around. A figure stood at the top of the stairs. A woman. Older, perhaps 70, with silver hair and cold eyes. She held a gun in her hand, and it was pointed directly at my chest. Margaret, Thomas said. His voice was heavy with something that sounded like grief. I was hoping I was wrong. You were not. Margaret Marsh stepped into the lantern room. She moved differently than she had in the cemetery. The grief was gone. The fear was gone. In its place was something hard and calculating. Something that had been hidden behind a mask for 30 years. You should have stayed out of this, Thomas. You should have let the dead stay dead. You killed them, I said. Eleanor. Ruth. You killed your own mother. Margaret's smile was thin and cold. My mother was a fool. She spent her whole life keeping Pemberton secrets, and what did it get her? Nothing. A drafty lighthouse and a death sentence from cancer. She paused. When she told me she was going to confess, I knew I had to stop her. Just like I stopped Ruth when she started to crack. Just like I am going to stop you. Why? Why protect Pemberton? He has been dead for a month. Because Pemberton was not alone. Margaret's voice hardened. Because when he died, his organization did not die with him. Because there are people, powerful people, who will do anything to keep those secrets buried. And I am the one who makes sure they stay buried. You are still working for them. I am surviving. Margaret stepped closer, the gun never wavering. That is what I have always done. That is what this town has always done. We survive. Whatever it takes. I looked at the gun. I looked at Margaret. I calculated distances, angles, possibilities. 23 years as a detective had taught me how to read situations like this. How to survive. But this was not a normal situation. This was personal. You wrote the letters, I said. The fake letter from Eleanor. The letter in Ruth's hand. You lured me here. I needed to know what you knew. Margaret shrugged. I needed to know if Eleanor had told you anything before I killed her. And I needed to tie up loose ends. Ruth was weak. She had been falling apart for years. The guilt was eating her alive. When you showed up, I knew she would crack. I knew she would tell you about Pemberton. About that night. She paused. I could not let that happen. So you killed her. I did what I had to do. And now you are going to kill us. Margaret smiled again. That cold, dead smile. Now I'm going to make it look like a murder-suicide. Thomas, consumed by guilt over his role in Catherine Winslow's death, kills her daughter and then himself. Tragic. Poetic. And most importantly, believable. Thomas stepped forward. His hands were raised. Margaret, he said. Please. This does not have to end this way. Yes, Thomas. It does. Margaret raised the gun. It always had to end this way. She pulled the trigger. But I was already moving. I threw myself at Thomas, tackling him to the ground as the bullet whipped past, shattering the glass behind us. Cold air rushed in. The wind howled. Margaret cursed and adjusted her aim. I rolled to my feet and launched myself at her. We collided with an impact that drove the breath from my lungs. The gun went off again, the bullet burying itself in the ceiling. We fell together, grappling, fighting for the weapon. Margaret was older than me but stronger than she looked. Decades of secrets had hardened her into something fierce and desperate. We rolled across the floor. My hand found her wrist. I twisted. She screamed. The gun clattered away, spinning across the floor toward Thomas. He picked it up. Margaret froze. I pushed myself to my feet, breathing hard, bleeding from a cut on my forehead where I had struck the iron railing. Margaret lay on the floor, her eyes fixed on Thomas, on the gun in his hands. Do it, she said. Kill me. That is what you want, is it not? After all these years of pretending to be noble, pretending to be good. Kill me and prove that you are just like the rest of us. Thomas stared at her. The gun trembled in his hands. I am nothing like you, he said. You are exactly like me. Margaret laughed. A bitter, broken sound. We both loved Catherine. We both failed her. We both spent 30 years lying to ourselves about what happened. She pushed herself up on her elbows. The only difference is that I accepted what I am. I stopped pretending. I survived. By becoming a monster. By doing what had to be done. Thomas shook his head slowly. No, he said. There is always another choice. There is always another way. He lowered the gun. I am not going to kill you, Margaret. I am going to let the law decide what happens to you. The law. Margaret spat the word. The law is a joke. The law can be bought. The law can be buried. The law does not care about justice. It only cares about order. Maybe, I said. I walked toward her, my hand steady now, my voice calm. But I spent 23 years trying to make the law work. Trying to find justice for people who had been wronged. And I am not going to stop now. I pulled out my phone. Dialed 911. This is Sarah Winslow. I am at Widow's Point Lighthouse. There has been a shooting. I need police and an ambulance immediately. Margaret closed her eyes. And for the first time since I arrived in Harborview, I saw something real in her face. Defeat. The police arrived within 20 minutes. Sheriff Hayes took our statements. Paramedics treated my wounds. Margaret was handcuffed and led away, silent now, her face a mask of nothing. As the sun began to rise over the ocean, I stood on the cliff top and watched the waves crash against the rocks below. Thomas found me there. What happens now? He asked. I do not know. I shook my head. I came here looking for answers. I found them. But I do not feel better. I do not feel at peace. I just feel empty. That is grief. Thomas stood beside me, looking out at the sea. It takes time. It takes patience. And it takes the courage to keep going, even when you do not know where you are going. Did you love her? My mother. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. I loved her. From the first moment I saw her until the last breath I will ever take. I loved her, and I could not save her, and I have spent 30 years trying to make sense of that. I do not think sense is possible. No. Thomas smiled sadly. But meaning is. We can find meaning in the suffering. We can use our pain to help others. We can take the worst thing that ever happened to us and turn it into something that matters. Is that what you did? I tried. I failed more than I succeeded. But I tried. He turned to face me. And now it is your turn. My turn for what? To decide what this story means. To decide what you are going to do with everything you have learned. He paused. Your father made terrible mistakes. So did I. So did everyone in this town. But you are not bound by our mistakes. You are free to write your own story. I looked at him. At this man who had loved my mother. Who had kept her memory alive. Who had waited 30 years for someone to finally ask the right questions. Thank you, I said. For what? For telling me the truth. Even when it hurt. Even when it would have been easier to lie. Thomas nodded slowly. The truth is never easy, he said. But it is always worth it. I stayed in Harborview for 2 more weeks. I needed to see it through. The investigation. The arrest. The slow process of untangling 30 years of lies. Margaret confessed to everything. The murder of Eleanor. The murder of Ruth. Her role in covering up my mother's death. The network of criminals she had been protecting since Pemberton's death. The FBI got involved. Arrests were made. People I had never heard of, people in positions of power, people who had been profiting from Harborview secrets for decades. They all fell, one by one, like dominoes. And through it all, I kept coming back to my father. James Winslow. The man who had betrayed my mother. The man who had spent the rest of his life trying to atone. The man who had loved me, protected me, raised me to believe in justice and truth. The man who had lied to me about the most important thing in my life. I visited his grave on my last day in Harborview. It was a small plot in a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of Boston. I had not been there in years. I had been avoiding it, I realized. Avoiding the memories. Avoiding the pain. Now I stood before his headstone and tried to understand. You should have told me, I said aloud. You should have trusted me with the truth. The wind blew through the cemetery. The leaves rustled. Somewhere, a bird sang. I know you were ashamed. I know you thought you were protecting me. But the truth has a way of coming out, Dad. It always does. And when it comes out decades later, it hurts more than it would have if you had just been honest from the start. I knelt down and touched the cold stone. I do not know if I can forgive you. Maybe not today. Maybe not ever. But I understand. I understand the fear that drove you. The desperation. The need to protect the people you love, even if it means protecting them from yourself. I stood up. I am going to try to be better than you were. I am going to try to tell the truth, even when it hurts. Even when it costs me everything. Because that is the only way to break the cycle. That is the only way to make sure the mistakes of the past do not poison the future. I walked away from the grave. And for the first time in 30 years, I felt the weight begin to lift. 3 months later, I stood in the lantern room of Widow's Point Lighthouse. The town had decided to keep it open. To maintain it as a memorial. Not just to Eleanor Marsh, but to all the people who had suffered because of Harborview secrets. To my mother. To Thomas. To everyone who had been silenced or destroyed by the lies. I had been asked to speak at the dedication ceremony. I had not wanted to. Public speaking was not my strength. But Thomas had convinced me. People need to hear your story, he said. They need to understand what secrets can do to a community. They need to learn the lesson that we learned too late. So I stood before the gathered crowd and spoke. 30 years ago, I said, my mother discovered a secret. A secret that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. And because she tried to tell the truth, she was killed. For 3 decades, that secret festered. It corrupted this town. It destroyed lives. It turned good people into monsters and monsters into victims. And it would have continued forever if one brave woman had not decided, at the end of her life, that the truth mattered more than her fear. Eleanor Marsh could not save my mother. She could not bring the killers to justice. But she kept the flame alive. She remembered. She waited. And when the time was right, she reached out and set in motion the events that finally brought the truth to light. I looked out at the crowd. At Thomas, standing near the back. At the faces of people I had come to know over the past months. People who had been living with secrets of their own. People who were finally starting to heal. I learned something in this town, I continued. Something I wish I had known 30 years ago. Secrets are poison. They start small. A single lie. A single omission. A single moment when we choose comfort over truth. But they grow. They spread. They corrupt everything they touch. The only cure is truth. Painful, difficult, terrifying truth. The truth that costs us our comfort, our reputation, our peace of mind. The truth that demands everything and promises nothing in return. But here is what I have learned. The truth, whatever its cost, is always worth paying. Because the truth is not just about facts. It is about freedom. The freedom to see ourselves clearly. The freedom to face our past without flinching. The freedom to build a future that is not weighed down by the lies we tell ourselves. My mother tried to tell the truth. She died for it. Eleanor tried to tell the truth. She died for it. But the truth did not die with them. It survived. It waited. And in the end, it came to light. Because that is what truth does. It finds a way. No matter how deep we bury it. No matter how long we run from it. No matter how hard we try to pretend it does not exist. The truth finds a way. And it sets us free. I stepped back from the podium. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, they began to applaud. Thomas caught my eye. He nodded once. A small gesture of approval. Of pride. And I understood, finally, why I had come to Harborview. Not just to solve a mystery. Not just to avenge my mother. But to learn something. Something that would change the rest of my life. We are not defined by the secrets we keep. We are defined by the truths we choose to tell. I walked down from the lighthouse and into the morning light. The ocean stretched before me, vast and calm, the waves gentle now, the storm long past. The town of Harborview spread along the shore, its houses and shops and streets alive with people who were finally starting to heal. And somewhere, beyond the horizon, the future waited. I did not know what it held. I did not know what challenges lay ahead, what mysteries I would face, what truths I would be called to tell. But I knew one thing. I was ready. I was ready to face whatever came next. I was ready to live without secrets. I was ready, at last, to be free. This has been the Lighthouse Keeper's last letter. A story about secrets and truth. About family and betrayal. About the price we pay for the lies we tell and the freedom we find when we finally speak the truth. If this story has touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me what you thought. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss another mystery. Your engagement means everything to me. Every like, every comment, every share helps these stories reach more people. And that is all I want. To tell stories that matter. To share truths that heal. To connect with you, wherever you are, and remind you that you are not alone. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until next time. Remember, the truth always finds a way. And it will set you free. The lighthouse beam swept across the dark water, steady and sure, guiding ships safely home. Just as it always had. Just as it always would.